Good morning, Ben. Good morning, everybody. Just share my presentation. And Ben and Mary Lou, thank you for inviting me to speak here about avocado pollination. I will focus in my lecture about some background about avocado pollination and later on about using honey before its pollination. And later on, Neil will extend about wild pollinator in general and especially on avocado. So general background about avocado flowers. We can see here the, 1 minute. We can see here the avocado flowers with the petals and sepals and anthers here around, and the female organ here in the middle, stigma, style, and ovary that will develop into a fruit after successful fertilization. The flower of avocado open twice. The first time they open as female flower, and they can receive pollen. The anthers at this stage are closed and do not spread pollen. Then they close and open again as a male stage flower, and then the anthers are open and release the pollen grain. At this stage, generally, the stigma is not receptive anymore, and effective pollination cannot be occurred. There are some controversy in the literature, and among researchers, there are some researchers that claim that during the second opening, in what we call the female stage, in the male stage, there is still receptive stigma. And if we have in the female stage receptive stigma and the anthers release pollen, the distance is very close, so there is spontaneous pollination. But most of the studies that have been conducted until now have been shown that in the second opening, the stigma is not receptive, and the flower is functionally a male flower. So if we look, for example, on Haas flowers, we can see that they open twice. In the morning, they will open as female stage. In the noontime, they start to close and open again afternoon as male stage and release pollen grain. In order to be pollinated, the female flower can get their pollen from nearby cultivar which belong to opposite flowering group. Avocado cultivar are segregated into two flowering groups with opposite flowering pattern. So if Haas is belong to group A and it's open as female in the morning, it can accept pollen grain from flowers of pollinizer like Ettinger, like Zutano or Bacon, that open as male flower during the morning, and in the afternoon we can have opposite situation, while the Haas provided pollen grain to pollinate the pollinizer, the Ettinger or Zutano or Bacon. So in this scheme, we have all the day long of effective cross-pollination between the cultivar. In addition to good overlap between the flowering of the female and male stage, we have another advantage that the cross-pollinated progeny have better chance to stand harsh condition, different environmental stress like heat waves. The self-pollinated fruitlet generally tend to abscess, and the cross-pollinated progeny, those that were pollinated from the other cultivar, generally will stand better those conditions. So there is another advantage to have cross-pollination. So if we'd like to have cross-pollination, we need to combine two cultivars in our orchard, the main cultivar and nearby cultivar from opposite flowering group. Many times people think that since avocado have so many flowers, even if small proportion of flower will be pollinated, we will have enough pollen grain and half pollinated flowers, and we will have plenty of fruit. But studies that have been conducted in New Zealand and in Israel have been shown that the proportion of flowers that received more than 7 pollen grain, which considered to be the minimal number of pollen grain, which will lead to effective fertilization, is almost zero. We can see here in New Zealand that almost all the sample flower had 0 pollen grain, and almost nothing got more than 5 pollen grain. And also studies that we have done in Israel have shown that less than 0.58 of the flower, a percentage of the flower were pollinated, and most of them with less than 7 pollen grain. And a similar study was done also by Rafi Stern in Israel and other researchers. So the situation in the avocado grove is that pollination is very important limiting factor for productivity, and only a small proportion of the flowers get enough pollen grain. There were been questions regarding the importance of insect pollination in general, and honeybee pollinators in specifically in avocado. And here you can see a study that conducted by Gadi Sham. I will cite him several times here. And he tried to assess whether avocado is pollinated by wind in the right side or by bees in the left side. And he found very nice correlation between the daily maximum honeybee density to the percentage of pollinating flower. When he did not saw bees on the tree, did not saw pollinated flower, and while the bee number increased, the percentage of pollinated flower increased. When he looked for the correlation between wind velocity to percent of pollination, he found no correlation. So this is another indication for the importance of good bee activity to get efficient pollination. Another study that got done in Western Galilee in Israel, he followed avocado trees. We can see here the what he called flower density. This is the curve of flowering. It was picked around 20th of April, and then it go down until the middle of May. He looked for the number of bees. Those are the circle. We can see the square, sorry, honeybee density. So most of the season, he didn't saw any honeybee at all. And only at the beginning of May, he finally saw many bees starting to visit the trees, only at the end of the flowering. And when he followed fruit set, most of the flowering period, he did not saw any fruit set. And only at the end of the flowering, when bees started to visit the flowers, he finally observed fruit set. And the reason that the bees started to visit the flower was that it was the end of the citrus flowering. Until the citrus grove, the nearby citrus grove, ended to flower, all the bees were in the citrus grove. When they ended to flowering, all the bees moved to the avocado. So all the yield this year was based on the 10% last flowers of this growth. And again, we can see a very nice impact of bee activity on fruit set. So I hope I succeeded to convince you that bee or insect pollination is important for pollination and fruit set in avocado. This is another study from South Africa. We can see here cage Haas tree and cage Ettinger tree with bees and without bees, with bees and without bees. And we can see again that without bees, the fruit set and the productivity is very, very low. So we need bee to move the pollen to the flowers or between the anthers to the stigma. So we need to. Never mind. Here in the upper part, it's written efficient, high productivity. So we need sufficient pollination level to have high productivity. In order to have sufficient pollination level, we need to have sufficient pollinator activity, honeybee or other pollinator, and we need to have existence of pollinizer in the field. The problem with sufficient pollinator activity is the low attractiveness of avocado flower to pollinators. We know that one of the reasons is the high level of potassium in nectar, which repels the insect from visiting in the flower, and this relatively small volume of nectar in the Hass flowers. There are other pollinizers that have higher level of nectar, and they are more attractive to bees in comparison to Hass. So what the grower can do is can increase pollinator population, manage pollinators or wild pollinators, and can combine pollinizer in the orchard in order to improve pollination. Now regarding pollinizers, generally speaking, we have the trees that are in the male stage, what we call pollinizer in our case. It's bacon tree. The bee visits those flowers, they cover their body with pollen grain, and then they move to the flowers of the main cultivar, in our case, Hass. Their body is covered with pollen grain of the pollinizer, and then they transfer the pollen grain to the stigma of the Hass avocado. We need to remember that most of the bees are not moving between the cultivar. Only small proportion of bees are doing this cross-pollination activity, mainly nectar collecting bees. So we need a large number of bees in orchard to have enough bees that will do cross-pollination. When we're speaking about cross-pollination, if we will place the pollinizer only at the edge of the orchard, the impact of those pollinizers will be only on the adjacent rows. So we will see an impact on the first or second row, but not on the inner part. And this is due to the fact that bees tend to move between close flowers. It doesn't spend energy to go far away. So generally, if bee will visit flowers of pollinizers, they will move to the adjacent trees or one tree after that, and not more than that. So it's important to spread the pollinizer all over the orchard and not only at the edge of the orchard. We can see here, again, from the study of Gadi Sham and Dini Zikovic, the percentage of cross-pollinating bees. They assess it by looking for bees that carry pollen during the female opening of the Hass. And in the adjacent row to the pollinizer, they've seen relatively high level of cross-pollinating bees, but when they go far away, the proportion of cross-pollinated bee reduced dramatically. So it's important to spread the pollinizer all over the orchard. There are different schemes. In Israel, currently, the common scheme is every third row, every third tree. In this way, we minimize the proportion of pollinizer, but it's very effective since every Hass tree can see a pollinizer tree in one of each side. There are several evidence from the past about the importance of cross-pollination on productivity. This was one of the first studies that was done by Hemdat Gani and Shmuel Gazit. They have a solid block of Hass, and the Hass have two in its edges. It have rows of pollinizer of Ettinger, and they have also some Fuerta in adjacent orchard. And when they look on the productivity of this orchard, when they go away from the Ettinger tree, if we look on the green bar, we can see a dramatic reduction in productivity with increased distance from the pollinizer, and it's overlap the percentage of fruitlet or fruit that are progeny of the Ettinger. This we can see by looking on the blue bar. So this is an evidence coming from Israel regarding the importance of combining pollinizer to the Haas orchard. I will show here two examples from a study that was done in California, probably with the involvement of Mary Lou and Ben. And here one of the experiments, we can see the yellow bars are Haas trees in the rows in which they have pollinizers. So those Haas trees have adjacent pollinizer nearby them, and then the productivity of those trees we can see always is higher than tree far away from those pollinizers. So this is one example for the importance of, another example for the importance of pollinizer, and this is another study conducted in California. And we can see different pollinizer written here on the x-axis, so we can see the different pollinizer have different potency as pollinizer, but we can also see that when the pollinizer are in the row, the productivity of the Haas is high, and then when we are going far away, 2 rows and later on 4 rows, the productivity is going down. It was constant in almost all the pollinizers. So another demonstration about the importance of pollinizer. Another study from the group of David Pettimore in New Zealand. We can see the proportion of remaining fruitlet after 2 months in Haas trees that were close to the pollinizer and Haas trees that were far away from the pollinizer. And we can see that the chance of fruitlet to stand on the tree and to develop into fruit is reduced with increased distance from the pollinizer. And the explanation is that the proportion of self-pollinated fruitlet is increased with increased distance from the pollinizer, and their ability to stand on the tree is reduced. So another example for the advantage of cross-pollination. So I hope I succeeded to convince you that generally combining pollinizer is important for productivity of avocado. Again, I must say that not all the experiments that conducted, and there were many experiments conducted all over the world, not all of them approve this assumption, but most of them have done so. And again, I have more experience from Israel, and I can say that in Israel, all the Haas orchards are planted with a pollinizer inside of them. In other countries, the method is a little bit different, but this is what is common in Israel. Now I'll say a few words about using honeybee for pollination. As I mentioned, Neil will speak about wild pollinator. I will speak about managing honeybee. Rafi Stern spoke, I think, a year ago about using bumblebee for pollination of avocado. But again, I will focus on using honeybee, which are the most common and most widely used pollinator for avocado. So just a few practical points on how to use them. First of all, for colony strength, we see the beehive, but beehive can contain different number of bees, from few thousand, from 2,000-3,000 to 50,000 bees. We'd like to have the hive as populated as possible. This system to assess the hive strength is not so common. The common method to assess honeybee strength is to assess the number of populated frame. This is a term that's known by the beekeeper. We cannot count every bee, every individual bee. So we just count how many bees, how many frames of the hive are populated with adult bees. And we also refer to the brood, developing larvae and pupa in the colonies. They are very important bees. Those are the young bees that renew the pollinator in the field, and the young bees that emerge from the hive at the beginning forage nearby the hive and doing good pollination work. So it's important to have a lot of brood, developing brood in the hive. So the general recommendation in Israel and other places is to have at least 10 populated frame and 7 brood frame in each hive when we use the hive for pollination of avocado or other crop that bloom during springtime. The foraging distance of hive, the foraging distance of bees can be very long, but generally, because of kind of dilution effect, their density is reduced with the distance. So generally, we say that 150 meters from the hive is efficient distance for foraging. We can see here example of avocado orchard in South Africa, and they monitor the bee activity on flowers, and they found that after 150 meters, there is kind of reduction in bee activity with increased distance from the hives. So generally, when we recommend the grower how to place the hive in the orchard, we ask them or recommend them to place the hives in groups that all the tree will be in distance of less than 150 meters from the hive to have a uniform and good bee activity all over the orchard. There is the advantage of placing the hive in a way that the wind will come from the orchard to the bees during the foraging time. There is tendency of the bee to fly upwind. So if the wind direction during the foraging hours is in this direction, we will prefer to place the hive at this size of the orchard. Another point for consideration regarding the placement of the hive is if we have another other agricultural area surrounded our avocado orchard, we'll try to go away from those sprayed field to reduce damages of spray. Another point is if we have a lot of flowers, wildflowers, or citrus groves that flower with our orchard, we will prefer to place the hive in the other side of the orchard to reduce the exposure or to allow the bee also to forage more on our target crop and then go to the other flowers. It's important to allow accessibility of the beekeeper to the different location to place the hive. And when we plan where to place the hive, generally it's important. This is, I mentioned earlier that hive, or let's say another way, tree will not be more than 150 meters from the hive. The situation that the beekeeper come and place all the hive at the corner of the orchard, and we have tree that located 300, 400 meters from the hive is not desirable situation. We would prefer to spread the hive all over the orchard. And this is an example from almond industry in which they provide the beekeeper with a map of the grove, and each point indicates the point in which the beekeeper need to place the hive and the number of beehive in each location, and it's allowed to have a uniform bee activity all over the orchard. Okay, so that was kind of a general background about the importance of bee pollination and pollinizer for avocado productivity. Thank you.
And a great introduction it was, Arnon. We've got several questions that have come up that I don't have answers to, such as, do you have any experience or knowledge of artificial pollination? And by that, I think it means hand pollination, as well as introduction of alternative sources of pollen rather than pollen being distributed by honeybees.
Hand pollination is not so practical in avocado, since the percentage of fruit set you will need to pollinate tens of thousands of flowers to have a few fruits. So it's not practical. I know that there are several initiatives or several startup companies that develop some machinery to do artificial pollination in avocado. Avocado is not the best candidate for those new systems. Generally, wind-pollinated crops are more suitable for those systems, or crops that produce a lot of pollen grain and not small amount of pollen grain, sticky pollen grain like avocado that do not tend to spread so well. And again, you need to come many times along the flowering in order to have efficient pollination. But I have seen some positive results, so maybe it works. We need to test it.
Yeah. Comment, at higher elevations, there's less honeybee activity. Is there some way to increase the abundance of honeybees at higher elevations? That's a supposition that I don't know about.
So I presume high elevation is related also to lower temperature and more wind. And I think those are affecting the bee activity more dramatically. The only way to provide good bee activity in lower temperature is to have strong beehive, and maybe to introduce bumblebee colony in countries in which they are accessible for pollination. Not in all the country. You can introduce bumblebee colony and to use also wild pollinator. Probably there are other wild pollinators that will work more effectively under those situations.
So here's a kind of common comment, observation. This year, about 10% of our trees started flowering in December, and we have trees randomly flowering right now. Anyone else experiencing this? And how do we manage pollination when some trees flower at random times at like this year? So this is the nature of avocados in coastal California. So can we manage this any better? Can we improve fruit set when we have random flowering from December through June?
The main issue, from all the trees' organs, the reproductive organs are the most susceptible to low temperature. And flowers that open during the middle of the winter, even if you will have bees active in the orchard, the chance that they will be viable, the female organ and the pollen grain is very, very low. So generally, those flowers that kind of out of season or very, very early, their chance to set is not so high. So I'm not sure that I would make a lot of effort to try to pollinate those flowers, and I will wait for time with better climate.
Better temperatures, yeah. What's known about the overlap of male and female flower phases in Hass and other varieties? So the question, I guess, is there improved fruit set when there's overlap of the male and female phases?
Yeah, I didn't emphasize it enough, and it's a good point. There is kind of overlap in the middle of the day, generally, between the female and the male stage. and in the same tree. We have some flowers that still open from the female stage, and we have flowers that already started to open at their male stage. And the fact that those flowers are very close one to each other allow relatively effective pollination. So it's important component of avocado pollination, but we just need to remember that those fruit will be what we call self-pollinated fruit, and their ability to survive and develop will be a little bit lower than fruit that are originated from cross-pollination.
Yeah. So some comment here is there any value in grafting pollinizer scions into existing Hass trees?
It's very interesting.
Not planting a pollinizer.
Yeah. It's very interesting issue, and it was tested in different crops that need cross-pollination, because in this situation, the distance between the pollinizer and the cultivar is minimal, and the chance for moving pollen from male to female and to have cross-pollination is very, very high. The problem is practical problem, because generally the tendency or the vigor of those grafted branches is different, and generally it's very difficult to ask the people that are doing pruning to keep them alive. So from the practical point of view, most of the cases that I saw people try to do it, the success was not so high, but it's interesting approach.
Yeah. If you're doing all the pruning yourself, you can do it. If you hire it done, it's not going to work. Question, is there any relationship between fruit set on northwest, south, east side of a tree? Is one side of a tree more likely to set fruit than another?
I don't know regarding the those sites. It probably affects the timing of the flowering. From my observation, the differences are not so big between the east and west side of the trees. Let's say not more than an hour from the time that east flower start to open to the west side. I don't have a real answer about this issue.
Okay, so here's a one. Has anyone determined the vigor of different pollinizers compared to saleable cultivars like Hass, Gem, and Reed? It seems to me that you could graft pollinizers of these cultivars if the vigor of each was similar. Am I missing something in my thinking? So the comment is, can you graft pollinizers that are of a similar vigor? I think you answered that. I don't know if that exists.
Yeah, it's need to be tested, and again, it will be complicated to know all the time what is a branch of the pollinizer, and to keep it, you need to color it. You need to find a way to preserve it viable. It can be done, but small scale, it's hard to believe that in large scale it can be done, but it can be tested.
Yeah. So you talked about honeybees. Are there current studies looking at alternatives to bees and bumblebees? So what are the other arthropods that are doing pollination, including, if you want to comment about hummingbirds?
No, I don't think that avocado flower are adapted to hummingbirds. If we would speak about passion fruit, passiflora, it can be relevant, but avocado flowers are too small, and the volume of nectar is too small for hummingbirds. I know that there are more and more studies about the use of flies. The project we have with Neil and Yael, we are focusing also on flies, and they are manageable. People use the flies, for example, for mango pollination and onion for seed production. So this is another interesting direction.
Yeah. Yeah, Neil Williams, our next speakers, will touch on the ecology of pollination. So are there more questions for Arnon? So thank you, Arnon. You'll be around. Thank you very much.
Thank you.